Hello everybody. I don't know about you, but on occasion I find automotive journalists extremely frustrating. And I say this not just as somebody who considers themselves an automotive journalist, but also as a car fan full stop. I can think of a great number of cases over the years where this has happened, but a few that spring to mind include the original Ferrari California, a car that on its launch everybody admitted they actually quite liked and definitely was a proper Ferrari, but by the time the California T came around, apparently they'd all decided that actually they hated it all along and it never was a proper Ferrari. And there was the incident in Evo magazine where they compared a Nissan GT-R with a Lotus Evora in a test that was won by the Porsche 911 that wasn't even there. How then does this relate to today's video? Well, in my research for this car, on account of it being so rare, I decided to break with one of my own rules and read some reviews to try and understand better what it is. And whilst doing that, I bumped into one by Auto Express, in which they gave the car either 4 or 4.5 stars in every single one of their categories. The final result for the car? 3 stars. And I don't know about you, but if a car gets 4 or 4.5 stars in all the different ways you measure it, that makes it a 4 or 4.5 star car. So today I'm here to answer the question, is this really a 3-star car? Is it somehow inexplicably far less than the sum of its parts? Or is it one that's just being hated on simply because it's an SUV and it's very trendy for us types to simply hate them? Well, let's find out. Today's video is sponsored by CarVertical, so if you find yourself on the hunt for a BMW, an Alpina, or even an Alpine, make sure to use their service, which will cross-reference a number of databases from around the globe to give you all the information you want to know on any potential used car purchase, including accident damage, regardless of whether a car has been written off, potential mileage discrepancies, outstanding finance, usage as a taxi, and even simple stuff like MOT failure information. A CarVertical search takes just 60 seconds and can be performed either on a desktop or through their mobile app. For 10% off the service, don't forget to use my discount code JAYEMM. So then, what is it that we actually have here today? This is an Alpina XD3. I'm pretty confident you've heard of Alpina. They're the company that take BMWs and kind of rework them into something just a little bit different. So comprehensive is this rework that in Germany they are gifted the status of being a manufacturer in their own right. I have previously driven just the one, a D3 in the most terrible of conditions, but that I actually really did enjoy. Over the decades, they've made a number of interesting products, and their USP has often been to build something that appeals to the person that wants something a little bit different, a little bit better performing than a regular BMW, but without the compromises, the harsh ride and all that stuff of a full-fat M car. In recent years, the line between the two has become somewhat blurry, and the firm has now actually been bought out by BMW itself. So, over the next few years, it's likely we're going to see a few changes in the way that Alpina does things. However, this car was made when they were still a wholly separate entity. It was introduced back in 2013 and then in 2014 facelifted along with the X3 on which it is based. The starting point chosen here was the 35D variant, which curiously is not just the most potent of the diesels, it was actually the most powerful engine BMW offered at the time, with the 35i having 302 horsepower and the 35D 308. And this, I think, reflects the fact that in 2013, diesel was essentially at its popular peak, with many companies, BMW included, putting a lot of effort into their engines. And here you can really see the results of that, because even in standard guise, the 35D engine is mighty, a twin-turbo 3-litre straight 6, which doesn't even sound particularly diesel-y and is not short of grunt. Not only does it have just over 300 horsepower in standard guise, it also had over 450 pound-foot of torque. The Alpina variant took this a step further. First off, they improved the car's cooling. They fitted the equipment you'd have seen in hot market versions of the car, and they did a few bespoke tweaks too. This was then joined by a remap, taking the power from 308 to 350 horsepower and torque up to 516 pound-foot. That's 700 Newton meters. This was then connected to the one and only gearbox available, an 8-speed system BMW dubbed Sport Automatic, and that sends drive to all four wheels via their patented xDrive system, which will shuffle power about as and when it is needed. The result, it has to be said, is rather effective, because despite the fact this is not a light car, at around 2 tons or so, it really moves. As is Alpina tradition, you don't have paddles on the wheel, but you do have very subtle little raised buttons, and in manual mode, the thing responds beautifully, the power is fed in very linearly and gently, and I've got to say, it has plenty of go. 2,000 to 3,000 RPM, and it's very, very strong. I recently drove the mighty 535D, the car that for me really kick-started the idea of diesels as a sexy option, but this is another step on from that. Oh, crumbs. It's quick, this thing. In fact, the last car I actually filmed for review was a 550 horsepower Aston Martin V8 Vantage, and I think this would keep up. Of course, there is a good amount of the car which is exactly the same as it would be in any other X3 of this type. So the switch gear, the iDrive infotainment, that's all the same. The space inside is the same, and here it's just about right, I have to say. The X3 has always confused me because it grew considerably from first to second generation, and I always felt like it grew just a little bit too much. What it essentially did was made the X5 become gargantuan, with this becoming really just about the right size for a 4x4 in Britain. So you've got plenty of room for passengers in the back, but this isn't a 7-seater. There is no third row in this generation. There is, though, a fairly generously sized boot, which I would say should fit the needs of just about anybody, really. You've also got the nice panoramic sunroof, a Harman Kardon stereo, which is decent enough, and though the iDrive is now dated, it was always one of the best systems of its kind, and I really, really like it. The only frustration really at present is the fact this car does have a heated steering wheel, and for the life of me, I cannot work out how to turn the blasted thing off. My hands are roasting. In any case, you're more than likely here for the Alpina bit rather than the BMW stuff. So, what else was different? Well, first up, you get these wheels. The suspension setup is chiefly the same as it is in an X3 35D. So it's got adaptive dampers and the like, but it has been tuned with Alpina specific settings. What those are, they don't really say, but comfort mode is just about right. Turn it into sport and it very quickly becomes just far too firm, very, very fidgety for British tarmac. Even on the motorways, this is not a setting you'd want to use. Comfort is fine. The other styling elements are actually also fairly subtle, so the only difference really between this car and a standard one is the new front spoiler, which I have to say I actually really like, and it does add an air of aggression to the car, the badging, and the classic Alpina strip down the side, which is an optional extra, though I think a no-cost one. The most confusing part of this car's specification was the interior. When I saw it, I was impressed by the airy and upmarket combination of light leather and wood, accented by the also no-cost option Alpina badging. It's certainly a classy affair. But I was also disappointed that it appeared to be no better than a nicely specified BMW. One of the highlights of an Alpina is their option of Lavalina leather, which in their words is one of the highest quality leathers that you can get. I was then surprised to find out later that this car apparently did have the Lavalina leather, according to the spec list anyway, but as you'll see, it doesn't look the same as the leather on Alpina's website, nor did it feel much nicer than the Nappa leather you'd get in a regular BMW. It wasn't bad, it just wasn't the level I was expecting. So if anybody can shed some light on the confusion, I would appreciate it. You also, unfortunately, couldn't have these with an Alpina specific colour. You had to choose from the regular BMW palette. And this one is called Sapphire Blue. I've got to say, I quite like it. The biggest problem Alpinas for me have always really faced is the fact that because they are an Alpina, not a BMW, when it comes to pricing, they really exist in their own dimension, with cars often seeming far too expensive for what they are. Case in point, to pick yourself up an X3 35D of this sort of age, you'd be paying between £17,000 to £23,000. If you can find yourself one of these though, it's going to be at least 30, if not a little bit more. And on the face of it, I suppose you could say, well, I'll just get a 35D and remap it and be done and save myself 10 grand. Okay, yeah, sure, you could. I suppose you could stick some springs on it as well if you were that fast, and you could call it a day. But the thing about Alpina is they kinda know what they're doing, and their expertise is in being able to get all these different elements and make them work together. Though there isn't really all that much that they've done here, it does just fit. Yes, the ride I think might be just a hair too harsh. I wish they'd fitted wheels just an inch smaller and the whole thing really would have benefited from it, but it does all come together really nicely. As soon as Fabian turned up in this car, I looked at it and went, yeah, I get that. He wasn't looking for an Alpina at all. He was in the market for a slightly premium SUV, so was looking at X3s, Audi Q5s, Q7s, Mercedes GLEs and the like. But when this cropped up, he took one look at it and went, that's a bit different. I fancy that. So snapped it up and almost immediately offered it to me for review, like the legend that he is. If you are watching this and you've also got an Alpina you'd like to see on the channel, please drop me a line because I'd love to sample a few more of them. He tells me that he's been surprised by the amount of attention that it gets, and I can understand that because you'd imagine that unless you're a petrol head, you wouldn't really know what makes it special. But apparently, a lot of people look at it, give them a thumbs up, or just make a comment on the car. People appreciate this is something just a little bit different. I think it's a handsome devil. I'll say it. Yes, I know I don't like SUVs on principle because the people that buy them for the wrong reasons, not because the cars are bad. And let's be honest here, you absolutely know that there was nobody ever who bought an X3 with the actual intent of taking it off-road. And for that reason, this car works, I think, just a little bit better because you can tell when they were building it, and certainly the Alpina version, they weren't concerned about its off-road ability. There's no button for a center-locking diff, there's no low-range transfer box, nothing like that. The car doesn't need it. As a result, it's lighter, more lithe, more agile than just about any other car with proper off-road ability. It's really quite an entertaining steer. It does feel more like I'm driving a saloon. The steering's not the best, but BMW steering often isn't. However, it's fairly direct. It's got a really nice keen turning, and there's a little bit of weighting, not much in the way of texture and feedback, but that's it. The engine responds beautifully. Honestly, most of this review, I've just left it in drive because it works. It's got plenty of torque. It doesn't really care what gear that it's in. And in terms of both performance and noise, there isn't really a massive benefit in terms of revving it out, despite the fact it has a standard fit, a Krapovich exhaust. Let's be honest here, it doesn't sound like an old Transit, but nor was it ever going to sound like an E46 M3. Visibility is generally pretty good, although this B-pillar here could do with being just a hair further back, but it's not as intrusive as some others. I've got a decent view of the bonnet. Yes, I cheat because I have a camera attached to it, but I can actually see the bit of bonnet the camera is attached to. The back being nice and squared off and not all fancy and coupe-like also means that even if the parking sensors, cameras and everything else fail, you can still place it with relative ease. Naturally, this car does have plenty of active safety systems, half of which have tried to stop me for no apparent reason while I've been driving the car, but that's not really an Alpina thing. I also like the plaque down here, which does lift the cabin in a small but appreciable way. I love the VIN plaque under the bonnet, which has the original BMW item neatly crossed out and the new Alpina one stamped in below it. And who could fail to fall in love with these beautiful and classic Alpina blue dials? I absolutely love them. They're so classy, they're so sexy, and I know it's a really small, weird thing, but you look at them all the time, so you do appreciate them. Likewise, the Alpina badge, which has to count for more than a BMW one, and the nice stitching to go with it. As Fabian hasn't had the car all that long, he hasn't been able to get a good handle on its actual economy figure, but the trip computer has been averaging just under 36 in the entire time that it's been going, which predates his ownership, and apparently on a run it is capable of doing close to 50 mpg, but don't quote me on that, please. The one particularly deal-breaking fly in the ointment is the fact that this car, being a slightly older diesel, is not ULEZ compliant. However, I am told there is a possibility that this is another example of a vehicle where actually it is sort of ULEZ compliant, but because it was older, it didn't get the required classification. So if you send off a certificate of conformity to TfL or whoever, they will actually let you drive it in town without the appropriate financial penalty. But again, I'm not exactly certain that is the case. Maybe it is for the regular X3, maybe not for the Alpina, maybe it's the case for both, I just don't know. If you do happen to know, please hop into the comment section and tell me. Even at the national speed limit with the sunroof open, as I have it now, there's not too much noise in the cabin. It's a very, very nice place to spend your time. So much so that, to Fabian's surprise, it's essentially taken over from his previous daily driver, an E93 BMW M3. That's the convertible version of the naturally aspirated V8, a car that he really, really loved. And just in case you're wondering, he's not got a massive family or anything like that. He's got himself, his partner, and a couple of dogs. So this really was a car that he bought because it was just a slightly easier thing to live with day to day, and he's found himself just not reaching for the M3's keys anymore. I'm certain there'll already be somebody reaching for their keyboard to tell me, well, that means he should hand in his petrol head card, but let's be honest here, this is just a fundamentally really, really decent car. It's got plenty of space, it's not a bad looking thing, the Alpina bit makes it a little bit special, and today, on some of my favourite roads, yeah sure, I'd really appreciate the noise, I think, of an M3. But unless one of you is being particularly silly, I think this would actually do a much better job of keeping up than just about any automotive journalist would ever really want to admit. And one thing to me is absolutely certain. This is not a 3-star car. So what side of the bed Auto Express got out of on that particular day, I really, really don't know. Is it a 5-star car? No. Am I going to head back home and start searching the classifieds for one? No. Though that partly is because I know there isn't one in the classifieds. However, for somebody on the hunt for something which still has many of the hallmarks of a BMW, easy to get parts for, easy to run, easy to service, etc., but they want something a little bit different, a little bit more interesting, you could do a lot worse than this. So, a big thank you then to Fabian for bringing his car out, and as ever, to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, and subscribe if you haven't already. We've just hit 300,000 subscribers, and the next step, I think, is 500,000. So let's get cracking. See you for the next one. Bye-bye.